Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity news podcast. Today, we've got a special episode. I'm joined by Caleb Boyd, DFIR analyst at Triskel Labs. Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you. It's good to be on. We've had quite a good start to the year and very busy already.
Yeah, absolutely. And also special guest, Craig Martin, Incident Response Manager at Triskel Labs. How are you going, Craig?
Feeling special now, that's for sure.
Well, we've got a jam-packed episode. We're going to be talking through a couple of different news tidbits that have come through in the last sort of fortnight. Caleb, do you want to give us an overview at the top around what we're going to be discussing?
Yeah, definitely. So the last fortnight has been quite busy, especially for FortiGate. They've obviously had the vulnerability that's come out, but then also a breach forums posting has emerged. So we'll be talking about the breach forums posting, and then we'll be going into the vulnerability, which is the hot topic of this fortnight. We'll also be around Microsoft had a bug. Like, Microsoft is quite big, so a bug is quite a big thing, and it allowed users to update their user principal name. So pretty concerning that. And around business email compromises and the whole payment redirection fraud side of things, there was a court hearing, and it actually had quite an interesting verdict/judgment. So we'll discuss about that a little bit. Donald Trump has also released the pardoned the founder of Silk Road. That was one of the first dark web marketplaces, and probably way before ransom leak sites. So that'll be quite good to dive into. And we also seen ransomware campaigns using email bombing, which is quite a new technique that we'll be going into. So yeah, covering quite a bit today.
FortiGate data posting. What's happened there?
Yeah, so it came about as a breach forums posting, and it was from a group known as the Belson Group. And they basically claimed, hey, we've got a whole lot of these FortiGate devices, and they published configuration files as well as VPN files. And it was over 15,000 devices, I'm pretty sure. So quite concerning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, what are some of the things that can happen with exposed VPN credentials?
Well, it's there goes 40 hours of my week, basically. So, look, VPNs by nature allow you to access internal resources from anywhere in the world. So if you've got credentials available to connect to a VPN, then it allows anybody with those credentials to access your resources. So the very nature of the product itself is what introduces the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Caleb, do you know when? Like, I've seen some back and forth regarding the age of this.
Yeah.
So, do you have any sort of commentary around that?
Obviously, with the posting, it came quite hot news really quickly, right? They've kind of attributed the first research into a researcher known as the Kevin Beaumont. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but he attributed it down to a CVE in 2022. So that's quite a while ago, right? And that means that these devices haven't been patched for a number of years, and that's where that leakage is coming from. So whether that was historical or whether they hadn't been patched and it's happened recently and all of that's come about, then the second part of it was further research, and different companies were doing research, where's this data come from, when's it been exploited, and around 32% of these devices still have their login interfaces exposed to the internet. Pretty concerning.
Yeah, less than ideal. Craig, what would be some, I guess, guidance for users of FortiGate and also all other sort of firewall or I guess
I'm not going to cast versions against devices. FortiGate. This is a problem for all firewall providers, all right? So
yeah,
the key thing is you really want to control how you manage these devices and where in the world you can manage them from. So if you need to be able to get in there change configurations of the firewall, do you really need to be doing that from down the coffee shop down the road? Apply some controls so that you can only do it from inside the office or from within an IP address that's static, that's never going to change, is probably the key thing. We talk about password strength. Password strength's really good 90% of the time, and then a CVE comes through that allows for raw credentials to be exposed. So it's not just about having a 40-character password. It's about controlling where you can sort of access these things from, and that's the only really thing you can't bypass.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say it all the time, but if you are an organization that has a perimeter device like this that has a big vulnerability like this come out, and you know that you were vulnerable to it for a period of time, it's always worth doing a threat hunt on it to make sure that you weren't actually impacted by it, because as we've mentioned many times before, updating the firmware or the software on a device is not going to remove any web shells or any other sort of nefarious things that might have been put on there by a threat actor. Microsoft bug allowed users to update their user principal names. Caleb, what's going on here?
Pretty concerning, right? Unprivileged users, so you and I could log into the Microsoft portal and we could change our user principal name. What on earth is a user principal name? Well, it's effectively your email address. So I could log into the portal and I could say, hey, today I'm Craig or I'm Rich, and I could change my email address. At this face value, it probably doesn't sound too concerning, so a user can change their email address. But when you consider business email compromises and these threat actors are getting access to these accounts, if a threat actor had that motivation, what could they do? Could they change a user account to impersonate the CEO, for example, or the accounts department? Then you're opening up the whole kettle of fish around things that we should start to be concerned about.
Yeah. So in theory, I could change my name to my email address to Craig and just have a little bit of a misspelling somewhere and be able to then send emails on behalf of Craig. Yeah, it's definitely got a bit of a wider attack surface. I guess, you mentioned before BECs. It's, the threat actor might get into the environment with a low privilege account, and then they can, set up additional emails there. I suppose also from an insider threat perspective as well, it could be quite a powerful tool from just having a user account to being able to set up additional emails also.
Yeah, just the speed in which some of these vulnerabilities get exploited too is probably one of the key takeaways for this. Like, the Microsoft stack is absolutely everywhere and everyone uses it, which means that there are just as many parties out there trying to find bugs, vulnerabilities within that stack that allow them to do, nefarious things. And this time was changing a UPN. Who knows what it will be next? Which, again, I think comes down to restricting things that people shouldn't be accessing. Like, there's no reason for a standard user to need to access Entra. And if they couldn't access Entra in the first place, they wouldn't have been able to leverage this vulnerability.
I'll put you on the spot here, Caleb. Do you know if this? I mean, I imagine it would have been, but this activity, would this have been captured in logging events in M365?
Yeah, I believe there would be logging that would capture this. To what extent? That's probably the bigger question. And yeah, that's the thing with the login is we find the login's great and it's been improved, but it's still not the most verbose and amazing login you can get. And that's where you need to start paying extra and getting your seams and your enrichment going. But yeah, I think it comes down to controls, like Craig mentioned, restricting what should be happening, what shouldn't be happening. Should really an underprivileged user be logging into the portal? Absolutely not.
Yeah, probably not a good idea. Court orders company to pay invoice after paying a fraudulent invoice. Craig, what's happening here? I know you read this article as well.
Look, so we're seeing this a lot in terms of business email compromise. So the motive of these groups performing these attacks is to identify invoices that they can intercept, put in fraudulent bank account details, and perform an attack called payment redirection fraud. What has sort of come out through this court case is the victim, so the one that was targeted and received the fraudulent invoice, sought to recover their costs from the compromised organization. So your systems have been hacked. There was somebody in there with unauthorized access. They sent me this fraudulent invoice. You should be liable for, the money that I've lost. And what's actually come out of the court case is the opposite. And they've found the victim is actually responsible for the funds that were lost, indicating that it's not necessarily just around technical controls. Technical controls are probably fallible. You need to have the appropriate processes in place to manage changes to bank accounts and payment details, which is something really interesting and probably a little bit counter to what we've seen taking place out there in the real world in incidents.
Mm. Do you think this will sort of have a bit of a precedence going forward, Caleb, on how these sort of, if there is litigation that comes out of business email compromises, do we think this will sort of set the trend on that, or do you expect a bit of perhaps some trying to maybe go a different way?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is probably the first that I've heard of a court case, but the amount of times that we get questions around stuff like this and where the burden of responsibility lies around these invoices, we get the questions in the incidents that we deal with day in and out. And it's really, from what we've been explained from legal vendors, is it lays on the paying party, and it's really making sure, are you paying the right person? And if you get in a bank details change, that's probably something that's outside of the ordinary, and you probably should be ringing up on a known phone number, not the phone number in the email signature, because obviously the threat actor could have modified that off the website or a existing phone number in your phone book. Yeah, definitely setting the precedent.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that before as well. It's like for these kinds of things, it's technical controls, but also business controls as well. Like you mentioned, picking up the phone and calling a known number for that organization to validate things like this.
Yeah. We've also seen, I guess, organization put it in their email signature to make it even more clear. And, if there was this to happen, they put in the email signature, say, hey, we'll never change our bank details. That's becoming really common for accounts departments.
I might introduce this one because I know a little bit about it, but this is Ross Ulbricht. It was pardoned by Donald Trump. So for those not familiar with the name Ross Ulbricht, essentially he operated under the alias of Dread Pirate Roberts, and he was in essentially running something called Silk Road, which is a dark web marketplace. It originally started as, selling drugs and things like that, and then kind of escalated from there. I believe a large part of the law enforcement's cases against Ross Ulbricht was around sort of assassinations and hitmen and things like that. So a lot of, I guess, increasingly nefarious activity was occurring on the Silk Road. So he was actually arrested in 2013, and it was quite an interesting tale about how that happened. Essentially, he was operating in a library, and then FBI, I believe it was, sort of staged a bit of an altercation between two people, which caught his attention, and that at that point they were able to get onto his laptop and stop him from locking it and making sure it was encrypted. So very interesting sort of background story on that. Do recommend, there's a book called American Kingpin: The Epic Hunt for the Criminal Mastermind Behind the Silk Road, if you're sort of interested in that story. But essentially, he ended up being sentenced in 2015 for 2 life sentences plus 40 years. for drug trafficking, money laundering, computer hacking, things like that. However, it's just come out recently that Donald Trump, now that he's sort of taken the position in the office again of president, he's actually called Ulbricht's mother to inform her of a pardon, and essentially he's been pardoned, and I suspect will be released from jail as well over the coming short period of time. So, Craig, Caleb, what do we think about this?
Well, it's probably firstly one in the long list of changes that have been made in the last week or so. It's probably a timely, reminder, if anything else, just around managing like your operational security and just how you maintain control of your infrastructure and your valued information. So all it takes is just one mistake, one slip up, and there's maybe 2 or 3 along the journey, but it doesn't take many breadcrumbs for somebody with ill intentions to exploit them. Especially now compared to 2013, in 12 short years, there's a radical difference in the way that people are able to sniff out information. So really, it's a bit of that timely reminder. Being January as well, good refresh for everybody, I think, as we go into the year. I don't know what you think, Caleb.
Yeah, the story of how he was caught was really interesting, and there's books written about it, which makes it really cool, and they're really interesting. So it goes into a little bit of detail around how he was caught and operational security, right? So these threat actors are targeted by law enforcement agencies, and these operations go for ages to try and pinpoint them. It's not a simple game. It's waiting for them to make a mistake. It's the same thing. It's just the reverse. We are trying to protect our organizations, and the threat actors are waiting for us to slip up. So the same thing for what they're trying to achieve with their operational security, we can apply for our security, and just being really conscious of that. The other thing is, apparently he's got a lot of Bitcoin stored away. So I'm really interested to see what happens there. Like,
what was the price of Bitcoin when he was arrested in 2013? It would a lot lower than it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering if he's got a couple of hard drives stashed away somewhere full of Bitcoin. And I wonder what if he does cash out, what impact will that have on the price of Bitcoin as well?
Yeah. I'm sure he won't have to work another day in his life. He'll have lots of
money. Probably
Yeah.
not. Ransomware campaigns using email bombing. Do you want to run us through that one, Caleb?
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard of email bombing before this. Like, obviously, you've heard about phishing, and initial access is really the cool way. It's how threat actors get into environments, particularly with ransomware. It's pretty concerning. So, had to read through this article via Sophos, and they go through detail in how threat actors are doing email bombing, which is essentially sending like thousands and thousands of emails in a couple hours, and it clogs up the user's email, and then they will be quickly followed by a phone call by the IT department or the help desk and saying, "Hey, we noticed that you're having this problem with your emails. Let's help you. Let's reset your password. What's your current password?" And then they've got access that way. There's also mention in the article around Teams messages and like making Teams messages from an external party to an internal party and posing as a help desk. So very similar. And I think the call out really is around how the threat actor then gets access. So once they do make this phone call, they're using off-the-shelf tools. So they're using Microsoft Quick Assist, and they're using Teams screen sharing. So they'll say, let's establish a team share, and can you share your screen and I'll take control.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Craig?
Like, I think we see this in other fronts in incident response as well, where threat actors are getting smarter in trying to understand what the natural defenses are for a user, that they're trying to compromise. and finding new ways to try and get into that circle of trust where they go from being somebody of suspicion to somebody that they can trust. So impersonating an IT support user, using legitimate applications that they use every day for their work, all of a sudden, okay, this is much more likely to be legitimate. It's an interesting one. It's a pretty tricky sort of technique, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have a fair bit of success with it, based on what we see day to day.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right, from a technology perspective to defend against something like this, because if you're an organization that uses Teams, it's not strange for Teams to be used, and someone might do screen sharing and take over. So I suppose a good way to sort of try and defend against this will be it's probably a pretty heavy education piece, right, for organizations and their employees. Sort of, make sure that if you see a strange, Teams message or emails about issues, then, contact IT team internally. You'll never be, contacted out of the blue. You shouldn't, share your screen with unfamiliar parties and things like that. You should never give out your password. Just sort of basic controls that you can probably use to educate staff members.
Yeah. It's a bit of a behind the scenes look, I think, in what happens in a lot of other more serious incidents as well. It's not the malicious code, unknown binaries that are getting you. It's the powerful, legitimate tools that are being blocked and are being trusted that are causing most damage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all right. How do you verify who the help desk is?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, for a big organization, you're not going to know the name of everyone working in the IT help desk, are you?
Definitely, yeah.
Maybe we'll see some deep fakes coming out of this as well. Final topic is vulnerability of the fortnight. It seems sort of every fortnight we're switching between Avanti, Mitel, and FortiGate, but we do have another FortiGate this time. Caleb, did you want to run through what this one is?
Yeah, definitely. So FortiGate obviously hasn't had a great fortnight. They've had obviously the listing, and then they've also had to release some critical vulnerabilities. The critical vulnerabilities are affecting FortiOS and FortiProxy. They are bypass vulnerabilities, so they leverage in the Node.js web shell module and allows threat actors to obtain a super admin privilege. So pretty concerning. It's essentially a privilege escalation vulnerability. The really cool out though is that it's been added to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. So that means that threat actors are using it. There's been proof that these have been used in real life incidents, and it's probably a really good idea to look at patching as soon as possible.
We haven't seen any fallout from this one yet, have we, Craig? Yet?
Not in terms of incidents, no. We've seen a few people taking those sort of remediation actions, but luckily no compromises yet.
And I mean, sometimes we don't see the effect of this straight away, do we? It can be weeks, months after this kind of vulnerability comes out.
Yeah, we'll be talking about this at some stage this year. Like that's it may not be tomorrow.
Yeah. Caleb, in terms of sort of actions required for organizations using this this equipment and on vulnerable versions, what are the recommendations for them?
Well, yeah, it's quite well tied into the listing that we discussed beforehand. They announced a temporary workaround, which, surprise, surprise, was disable your administrative access from the internet. So probably that's the biggest call out is, there's not a need for having that out there, restricted to a couple of IPs if you really absolutely do need that. But then they have also released the patches, obviously, as expected. So updating those devices as appropriate, and then that mitigates the vulnerability. Ensuring also threat hunting, making sure that it hasn't been exploited, and then going from there.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much a wrap for all of the topics that I wanted to cover in this episode. Just want to say thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.